Would the children of today's European end up as servants and maids of the Chinese? Never to pull his punches, Mr. Casey says that America was not about a country, but an idea. Mr. Casey is one of the most sought-after speakers. He has written 2 New York Times bestsellers, including Crisis Investing. He frequently contributes to LewRockwell.com and Liberty Magazine. Now I would like to invite Mr. Casey at the podium to share his worldview about the philosophy of human liberty.
Thanks, Rajni. I really enjoy these things that Giant puts on every year because unlike a lot of conferences that I speak at, I'm really pleased and proud, and I'm not at all embarrassed to be here with the other speakers, which is often the case in other venues. And I agree with everything I've heard today. I just got to say, my good friend Rick Rule was wrong in one important regard. He says that he's not a philosopher and an economist, but that's not true. He is a philosopher because a philosopher, we have to define these words, very important, is one who loves wisdom. And he spoke wisely, so he is a philosopher. And he is an economist, because what is an economist? Certainly not Paul Krugman. An economist can be defined as someone who accurately describes the way the world works, not prescribes the way they think the world ought to work, and then whisper it in the ears of politicians to enforce it. So, the way I typically like to start a presentation to especially a libertarian audience is I like to ask a question. I have some bad news for you. There's a federal agent from a nasty agency that's been planted here to monitor this, to perhaps to be helpful to round up the usual suspects when the time comes. So to save yourself embarrassment, I know where you are, I know who you are, I'd ask you politely, please stand up and identify yourself at this point, would you? I'll wait. Oh, good, okay. I've been doing that ever since I gave a speech in the Cayman Islands with a lot of really dodgy types about 15 years ago or so. And just as a goof, I mean, this was just a comic ploy. And I asked that question, and I swear this is the truth. Not one, but 2 people stood up. And I think it was because just like a cop has to identify himself if you ask him, 2 people stood up. So I thought that was quite amazing. Okay. Another thing I always like to do when I'm not in the United States, I don't dare do this anymore in the United States, is I like to tell a little joke. And people often ask me, Mr. Casey, who are you to give financial advice? I mean, you've never even had a real job your whole life. How come it is you've never ever had a real job? And I always say, well, you know, on those employment application forms they have you fill out, and they ask you, do you advocate the overthrow of the US government by force or violence? Well, I always check violence. Anyway, as Rajni mentioned, I shouldn't even mention America because America is dead. America is an idea. It was an excellent idea. It was a unique idea, but it's dead. I call it the United States now. I don't even call it these United States, which incidentally, when people spoke of the United States, well, even 50 years ago, certainly 100 years ago, they didn't say the United States, they said these United States, which that issue was solved finally during the War of Northern Aggression from 1861 to 65. So it's an entity, and it's not a composition of individual places. But starting out talking about the U.S., the subject of my presentation, incidentally, is going to be on the nature of evil and stupidity. These are two twins, actually, that are often mistaken for each other. And most of what I'm going to talk about is going to be about evil and stupidity, what they are, and how they're often confused with each other. But talking a little bit more about America first, some of you guys are going to remember this. Back in the 50s and the 60s, when we were kids, and maybe when one kid would be razzing about something or whatever, getting risque or a little out of control, he'd say, "Hey, it's a free country." And you notice how nobody says that anymore? That phrase is passed out of existence. I mean, this is some rare intellectual honesty on the part of the average chimpanzee out there who doesn't really figure out why he doesn't use that anymore. And even during the 70s, there was something during the Vietnam War they used to say, "Yeah, America's never going to have concentration camps. We'll call them something else." And it turned out we do. They don't call Guantanamo a concentration camp. So the U.S., and to a lesser degree, but a great degree, Canada, used to be a place where you could do anything that you wanted to do, as long as you didn't hurt anybody else, and anything that, but now almost everything that's not obligatory is actually prohibited. And I like to sort some examples out. They got these signs everywhere. They got no running, no jumping, no swimming, no diving, no fishing, no hunting, no talking, no swearing, no sassing, especially if you're talking to a government agent, you've got to be respectful. There's no juking, no jiving, no socializing, blowing dope, snorting coke, practicing your stroke. I mean, you're not supposed to do anything. There's no sex, no drugs, no violence, except by the state. There's no alcohol, no tobacco, no firearms. They even got an agency to regulate the 3 things you need for a camping expedition or a halfway decent party. And of course, there's no smoking. I mean, especially in this city, the smoke Nazis have taken over. And normally at this time, I would light up a cigarette. I far prefer cigars to cigarettes, but I wouldn't dare light up here a cigarette, because I lit up a cigar in our office. We used to have an office next to it was in the RBC building, actually, on Hastings Street. And so at the end of a day, I opened a window, sat next to the window, had a smoke. And this is the truth. After I left the office, about an hour later, somebody thought they smelled cigar smoke, and they called whatever Vancouver authority. They came in. There was no evidence of the cigar, but he sniffed. He made the determination that a cigar had been smoked, and they fined us $1,500. I kid you not. That's the truth. And that was a couple of years ago here in Vancouver. So I'm not going to light up smoke as much as I'd like to after lunch.
Could you have smoked on the street?
Yes, if I smoked more than 10 feet from the building, as you know, here in Vancouver. But a cigar is a contemplative experience. You can't stand on a street corner and smoke a cigar. It's not the way it works. So now you've got to, if you're very daring, I mean, the only time you can have a cigarette in the city is maybe after sex or maybe before you're going to be executed. But that's about it. And when I do smoke a cigarette, I prefer American Spirits. Any of you that saw that movie with, who's Goldie Hawn's other? Kurt Russell, right, where he played Snake Plissken. And I thought it was a great scene where at the end of Escape from L.A., he's smoking an American Spirit. I thought that was a well-done movie in many ways. But anyway, everybody's gotten used to doing what they're told. And the trouble with libertarians is that we do what we're told too. There's a lot of good reasons for that. You don't want to get thrown in jail, you don't want to get in trouble, it's inconvenient and so forth. But let's admit it, we're all a bunch of whip dogs, and we act like it. And if circumstances are right, we're not just whip dogs, we roll over on our backs and wet ourselves. Like, I mean, it's really degrading. And a lot of people think I got a problem with authority. But that's not true. I just don't like other people telling me what to do. But I think it's all very much out of control. But I see whip dogs everywhere. I especially see whip dogs when you go through an airport, especially in the US. It's the worst now. But everywhere. Or when people go through customs, anywhere. They always smile. Look at what you do when you go through customs, or immigration at an airport. The guy takes your passport. People smile ingratiatingly. They make supplicating motions. They grovel at this disgusting petty official. My God, if you do that, if you act like that to one of these worms, then you deserve the world that you're living in today. So I just wanted to draw that to your attention because a lot of you probably just do that responsively, reflexively. Don't do that. I never do. So why do people do that? I would say that it's a matter of psychology, which is a good measure of what I want to talk about here today. And it has to do with an acceptance of collectivism. And that's the real problem in the world today. It's the philosophical acceptance of collectivism. And I'd point out to you that collectivism and statism are not intellectual problems. This is one of the problems with the libertarian movement. We're very intellectually oriented. It's why, for instance, 90% of this group are males, because males, for some reason, tend to look at things from an intellectual point of view, but women tend to look at things more from a psychological point of view. It's just in the genes. It's the way we're programmed by an accident of birth. And I'd point out to you that this is one of the reasons why libertarians are not terribly successful in propagating our philosophy, because we appeal to the intellectual. But the problem is not intellectual. It's easy to explain these things, why statism is stupid and counterproductive. It's really a psychological or even a spiritual problem. That is the nub of the issue, not intellectual. It's a spiritual aberration. So I want to look at some individuals that perhaps characterize the problems. One of my recent bête noirs was the last, not the current, but the last vice president of the US, Dick Cheney. And this guy was a genuine sociopath, an actual criminal. And you could sit down and talk to him about these principles, and he could intellectually comprehend them, because when it comes to passing an IQ test, I would think that he's at least at the 110 level anyway. He could understand that. But it would never sink in. The chances of your changing of his attitudes would be slim and none, and slim's out of town, so you can forget about that. Now, why is that? It's not because he's stupid. It's not because he can't understand. It's because he's a sociopath. It's because it's his nature. And I can substitute hundreds of names that you all know for Cheney. It's just that he's a really glowing example, in my opinion. The guy has no conscience, and he's susceptible to intellectual arguments against a police state to about the same degree a cat can be convinced that he shouldn't torture a mouse before he kills it. They're cold, these sociopaths. They're unemotional. They're like reptiles, even though they look like people. And I'm going to build a case that they may not even be human beings. And you may think I'm kidding, but I'm not kidding, because we all know that power corrupts. But I think it's more important to realize that the corrupt seek power. It's not just power that corrupts, it's the corrupt that actually go to seek power. It's the sociopaths that actually go to seek power. And that's because you've got two basic types of people. There's lots of ways of dividing people. But from a moral, ethical point of view, let me choose this one. You've got people that are interested in controlling the material universe, controlling the world. Scientists, engineers like to manipulate things, build things, and so forth. Okay, that's wonderful. That's one of the mainsprings of human progress. Then you've got other kinds of people. They are not interested so much in that. They're in manipulating material reality. They're interested in manipulating other people. And that's one good way, a good fingerprint of a sociopath. So those are the two types of people. And guess which type inevitably is drawn to government, which is pure congealed power and coercion, forcible manipulation of other people. So I would make the case that sociopaths are inevitably drawn to government. And also big corporations, which are hooked up with government, and the media, which is hooked up to it, because all these things tend to manipulate people. That's what they do for a living. So let me get deeper into the subject of stupidity and evil, and which is which, and if you're dealing with somebody that's not quite right, how can you tell if it's a knave or a fool that you're dealing with? Let me cover stupidity first. Some of you are probably thinking, sure, I can see that Dick Cheney was a sociopath, but what about Bush, who was the president at the time? You all remember him, and you're thinking, he's more of a fool than a knave. Pity the poor fool. Isn't it a mistake to accuse somebody of malevolence when Occam's razor might indicate that stupidity is a more likely example or answer for doing the wrong thing? And I've thought about it, actually. And stupidity can account for a lot of things in the world. I mean, as Einstein famously said, after hydrogen, the most common thing in the universe is stupidity. So, I mean, you've got to give people the benefit of the doubt based on that for stupidity as opposed to malevolence. But as with all these things, I like to define the words, because stupidity is a word that's often used, and it's usually used as a pejorative. And perversely, when it's used as a pejorative, it's often used by stupid people who call other people stupid and never define the word. So I want to try to do that. It's important to define words precisely, because unless you define words precisely, then how can you be sure you even know what you're talking about, or how can you be sure that other people are defining the word the same way, and then you're at cross purposes and you can't possibly communicate with each other? Most of the time, people use stupidity as a synonym for low intelligence. And that's accurate, of course, but it doesn't really tell us anything we don't already know. And of course, when you look at how stupid the average person is, and then you figure that half of the people are more stupid than average, I mean, we're really in trouble at that point. Going back to the baby Bush, who I think is like a poster child for all this, I've always said that he was stupid. Technically speaking, I think he's actually a moron. Now, stupidity comes in flavors, and I want to get into this for a moment because it's actually quite important. Most people don't know that a moron, an imbecile, and an idiot, although these words are used interchangeably, they're actually clinically defined. They're not at all the same thing. An imbecile is somebody who can get by in society, walk down the street, get by, needs a little bit of assistance, but he can get by in the real world. An idiot is somebody whose intelligence is so low, he really has to be institutionalized. It's very problematical. A moron, though, is much more interesting because a moron can conduct himself in day-to-day society just like any other human being. He can talk about the weather, the state of the roads, can talk about sports, TV sitcoms, or in the case of Bush, he can talk about the economy, the wars, and he can seem more or less normal. But my guess is that Bush has an actual IQ of about 85, and that would be about the average for a moron, just somewhat below the average. And I think I can prove this to you by giving you some examples. Talk about the current president candidate for the Republicans. The Republicans are the stupid party, the Democrats are the evil party. I want to go into that a little bit more. You have the equivalent up here in Canada, too. Romney appears to be stupid. I'm not sure if he's anywhere near as stupid as Bush, but he appears to be. One good definition of stupidity, and I think you'll like this. Stupidity is an unwitting tendency to self-destruction. That's why comics that do stupid things like slapstick, stumble, and all that, it's an unwitting tendency to self-destruction. So I like that definition of stupidity. And I'll give you another definition, which I think is quite good. It's an inability to correlate cause and effect. That's much more helpful than saying that somebody has low intelligence if they're stupid. It's an inability to correlate cause and effect. That's what makes people look stupid. So look at those two definitions, or if you wish, an inability to predict accurately the consequences of actions. And I'd suggest to you that when you look at Bush, who's, like I said, a poster child of stupid, like Cheney was a poster child of evil, his entire life, he seems to fit that definition to a T. A good definition of an economist, gave you one when referring to Rick, but there are some others that are worthwhile knowing when you think about an economist. It's not somebody that has a PhD from some university. An economist is somebody that can see not only the immediate and direct consequences of actions, but the indirect and delayed consequences of actions. Now, even a moron can, not an idiot, but a moron can almost always see the immediate and direct consequences of an action, but he can't see the indirect and delayed ones. That's what makes him look stupid. So that would seem to indicate that not only Bush is a moron, but the average American voter who voted for him, because they usually vote for somebody that's marginally more intelligent than they are, if Bush is a moron, then the people voting for him must actually be imbeciles, because they vote for somebody like a standard deviation above their own level. So this guarantees, in my opinion, a sad future for the US. But let me go into this a little bit further still. Stupidity is only a partial explanation of these people. Let's look at better-known sociopaths that are inevitably drawn to governments and wind up controlling them. They wind up controlling governments when the bigger government gets, the more attractive it is to sociopaths, and the higher percentage of people that are sociopaths work for the government. Early in the founding of any country, when the government is small and relatively benign, and maybe some people of goodwill try to run things right, it's not the greatest environment for sociopaths, better than society at large, but not the greatest. But as it gets bigger and gets more out of control, they're inevitably drawn to it. I would say that criminals, even criminal geniuses, are basically stupid according to the definitions that I've just given you. And let's take Hitler. People say, well, Hitler was a criminal genius. Well, yeah, I suppose that's true from one point of view, but then you have to look at their actions. You have to be objective about this type of thing. I'm very anti-Christian, but nonetheless, Jesus of Nazareth said wise things. That's one of the reasons why St. Paul's religion, that was roughly built on Jesus, I don't know how they did that, became so popular, because they're gems of wisdom. And one of the gems was, by their fruits you shall know them. So how stupid was it to attack Russia when you still had an open front in the West with the British. How stupid was it to throw the Sixth Army at Stalingrad? There are probably 50 things from World War II that I could give you that show the stupidity of Hitler. Well, how about Stalin? Maybe he was a genius since he was able to beat Hitler, but I'd say that he was a sociopath, and like all sociopaths, he was actually stupid, not just evil, but stupid. How stupid was it to starve millions of kulak farmers in the 30s when the country was already starving? How stupid was it just before when Hitler was building up to execute hundreds of thousands of experienced and well-trained officers and higher NCOs in the Red Army just before World War II? He was constantly doing stupid things, but you know, the 30s and 40s was the era, the last era, the previous era, when sociopathy and evil and stupidity ruled the world. Look at Roosevelt. Americans look at him as being a genius to save the economy from the Great Depression. Of course, that's an incredible lie and inaccurate. How stupid was it of him to pour milk in the gutter when people were starving because of his actions? Slaughter livestock when people are starving because of his actions, making it worse, burdening the economy with taxes and regulations at the bottom of the Depression and so forth. So I don't need to catalog all these stupidities by political leaders. You guys all know that. That's the intellectual stuff. But here's the point I want to make. Political leaders are almost invariably stupid about actual reality. What they're not stupid about is manipulating people. Getting back to what I said about the two types of people, manipulating reality and manipulating other people. So that's where people get confused. They're geniuses at the one, manipulating people, but very stupid about reality. Now, let me talk a little bit about evil, having talked a little bit about stupidity, because they are like fraternal twins, actually. And I'd like to suggest that what differentiates political elites from other people is a capacity for evil. So what's evil? Evil is the intentional commission of acts that are cruel or unjust. I think that's a good definition of evil. It's not what Holy Mother of the Church says or anything like that. She doesn't use that definition. So I'd like to suggest that political elites are almost exclusively and necessarily composed of sociopaths. And it's not that they just aren't normal human beings. I'll go back to what I said before. I'd say that they're barely even human. Now, how can I say that? That's a radical kind of statement and very politically incorrect. It can get you into a lot of trouble. It can be a slippery slope. Well, I would say it has nothing to do with who somebody is, where they're born, none of that stuff. That's all completely trivial and pointless and meaningless. It has to do with the way people act. And I could give you about a dozen really interesting tip-offs to where you're dealing with a sociopath, but I picked 4 of them that I think are perhaps outstanding. First one is that they completely lack a conscience or any real regret for hurting people, although they always pretend the opposite, and you think that they were just the sweetest and most loving people in the world. Just the opposite. Pathological liars also. Second thing, in addition to not having a conscience, is they always put their own desires and wants on a totally different level from those of other people. They truly believe that the end justifies the means, although they always pretend the opposite, because they're liars. 3, they consider themselves superior to everybody else because they aren't burdened by these emotions and ethics that other people might be burdened by. That makes them extremely arrogant, although they pretend the opposite because they're liars. And 4th, they never accept the slightest responsibility for anything that goes wrong, even though they're largely responsible for almost everything that goes wrong. So these are identifying points of a sociopath. And above all, they're chronic and extremely convincing and enthusiastic liars. And that means that they're not easy to spot because they don't They don't look like a Whipley Snidelash with a mustache and all this type of thing. And they're skilled at cultivating a social veneer so that when you first meet them, it's very hard to dig through that social veneer, that mask of sanity that they wear over their face that misdirects suspicion away from them. It's why in a good murder mystery, you, at least initially, never suspect the guy that actually did it. It's always the guy you don't suspect, it seems. So, real humans have a conscience. They feel genuine remorse if they do something wrong. It's kind of interesting to me that in the so-called criminal justice system, the judge always wants the guy to show remorse. That's usually just a bullshit act and all that. I mean, of course he's going to show remorse because that's what the judge wants, but it's rarely sincere. On the contrary, they're actually proud of it. So you may be thinking that what happened in Nazi Germany, the Soviet Union, Mao's China, Pol Pot's Cambodia, and scores of other countries can't happen in the US, or for that matter, can't happen in Canada for some reason. But let me posit that the proportion of sociopaths here in society, and among the 7 billion people on the face of the planet, is constant, I think, across space and time. I'm mainly a believer in nature as opposed to nurture. I mean, it's an interesting separate discussion. But I think that the population of sociopaths is pretty constant across space and time. Only at some times, when conditions are right, do they evidence themselves. It's like mushrooms after a rainstorm. You don't know they're there until after it rains and they blossom. And I'm suggesting that we're having a rainstorm now. I'll give you one piece of evidence for that. In the United States, we've got about 60,000 or so people that are working for the TSA. And my question is this, where did they find 60,000 generally middle-aged people to go and put on a costume and act in a degraded way and degrade other people? What kind of a human being would do that? They must have been doing something else before. So I suggest to you that there's a heavy, heavy population of sociopaths among the TSA. And the creation of an organization like the TSA has drawn them out from under the rocks, much the way the creation of the Gestapo or the Stasi or the NKVD or any of these hundreds of organizations across time and space always drew out those sociopaths that maybe they liked kids, they liked dogs. Hitler liked kids and dogs. They liked to play baseball on the weekends. But when they see that opportunity, oh, TSA, extra couple dollars an hour and benefits, they're drawn to that and they start reinforcing themselves. And if there's any decent human beings working in a criminal organization like that, they're eventually driven out and the whole organization becomes corrupt from top to bottom. So these things get worse. They don't get better. They necessarily get worse for just that reason. Now, part of this is also an expression of Pareto's law. I'm sure you are all somewhat familiar with that. It's the 80-20 rule. 20% of your salesmen do 80% of the selling. 80% of the crime in society is by 20% of the people. That 80-20 rule is actually quite accurate. It works everywhere. The application of it I would use here is that my opinion is that 80% of human beings are basically decent. They're not libertarians, but they're basically decent, get along, go along. Okay? That's why society kind of hangs together the way it is. But out of that 20%, those people might be called potential trouble sources. And 20% of that 20% are actual bad apples. They're actual criminal personalities. They're actual sociopaths. Then you take 20% of that 20%, and you're dealing with really bad actors, really dangerous people. And I think that they're coming to the fore at this point. Now, why does the average person accept this situation, these criminal organizations that are now coming to the fore, not just in the US, not just in Canada, but all over the world. Governments are getting out of control. This is true everywhere in the world today. They're all going on the rampage. And you might wonder why that is. And I can give you two reasons for this. One is that the average person has no philosophical anchor. I mean, really, he's never actually thought, no way he's ever listened to any of Stefan's shows. He's never thought about, the implications of what's actual right and wrong. He believes what he just hears or some teacher, some government employee told him. So I'd say that's the number one thing. So they don't even have the intellectual grounding. And as I pointed out, the problem isn't even intellectual. It's spiritual and psychological. But they don't even have the intellectual grounding to start with. And the second reason, certainly referring to America, is the whole country has become a nation of limp dicks. I'm so tired of hearing this blather about the land of the free and the home of the brave and support our brave troops and all this. It's all so much bullshit. So, all right, so what's going to happen now? I think that sociopathy, because these organizations have been created, the government has become virulent, the average person, especially as the economic situation gets worse, and I think it's going to get much worse. We're just in the eye of the economic storm right now. As we go out the other edge of the economic storm, which will be much worse and last much longer, much longer than what happened in 2008 and 2009, I think that there's going to be a cry from the average person all over the world, Europe, China, Japan, US, Canada, everywhere, for the government to do something. Because everybody has been programmed to believe the government's a magic cornucopia that can solve problems, even though it's the one that causes the problems. It's so perverse. It's so backwards. It makes me, well, what am I doing on this planet with all these crazy chimpanzees? I must have committed some crime elsewhere in the universe to be put here. I don't know. So I think that the trends in motion tend to stay in motion and tend to accelerate, much the way when you roll a snowball down a hill from the top of a mountain. It gathers and gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And is it going to reach the size of the earth? No. It eventually, when it hits the village at the bottom of the valley, it explodes itself, destroys the village, and then things start over again. But the thing is only halfway down the mountain yet. So what's going to happen politically, because politics is the real nature of the problem. What's going to happen? Well, first of all, people shouldn't think politically. I think it's a big mistake on the part of libertarians, considering that sociopaths are automatically drawn to politics like flies and drawn to a pile of dog crap. So it's a mistake for libertarians, I think, to think politically and talk about politics. I'm doing it now simply because I want to identify the problem, okay? But my idea of a proper president, assuming you have to have a president, which I don't assume, is the president of the Swiss Confederation. There's a prosperous, peaceful country. Nobody knows who he is, and nobody cares, because it doesn't make any difference. So that's the ideal president. When it comes to American presidents, my favorite president is William Henry Harrison. Why? Because he was only in office a month before he died, so he couldn't have done much damage. But in those days, the government was vastly less powerful anyway, and therefore much less attractive to sociopaths. So these two parties in the United States, you got the equivalent here. Most countries in the world have a so-called liberal and a so-called conservative party, but they're all quite similar, and it's very interesting. The stupid party, which is the right wing of the Demopublican Party, has gotten into the habit of picking old, hostile, mildly demented white men. And the left wing of the Republican Party is more innovative. Now they got a slick young black guy, very presentable, very personable. So this is an interesting runoff they got between these two guys coming up here. But I'll tell you why the average person intuitively despises the right wing of the Democratic Party, the stupid party. They intuitively distrust and despise them because they can intuit that they're dishonest. Why do I say that? It's because the Republicans definitely don't believe in social freedom, but they say they believe in economic freedom, okay? But that's a lie, of course, because most of the worst economic law has been made under Republicans, as a historical fact. And the left wing of the Republican Party says they believe in social freedom, but they definitely don't believe in economic freedom. So you're offered a Hobson's choice at best. But the worst part of it is that the Republicans always say that they're for capitalism and the free market, and they're the biggest interveners. So you can tell that they're liars, and the laws that they make are all to pad the pockets of the people that are biggest campaign donors. So I'm sympathetic with the people that despise the Republican Party because the Democrats are actually more intellectually honest. I mean, they're despicable, but at least they're honest about their intentions. Just the opposite of Guy Fawkes. One of the things I like about Guy Fawkes is they said he was the only man that ever entered Parliament with honest intentions. So, although I consider him a good guy, the Democrats are kind of like that. But the Republicans are hypocrites and they're liars, and nobody likes that type of thing, in addition to the kind of candidates that they get, which represent what they are. So my guess is that Obama's going to win this time. It's a toss-up. I'll tell you why. Because the majority of Americans are net recipients of government largesse, and they don't want that to go away, especially during hard times. So they're going to vote their pocketbook. On the other hand, it's like Clinton said when he was running. He said, it's the economy, stupid. And if the economy really falls apart in the next few months, and I don't know if it will or not, then they'll reflexively vote against whoever's in office. But I can't imagine all these poor people voting for Romney. So I don't know. All I feel much more certain about is that the next American election in 2016, I presume we'll have one then, the winner is going to be some left-wing general, because Americans love their military. They just love their military. They're such idiots. And they'll get a left-wing general, because Americans trust the military, at least at levels below the Pentagon, which most people kind of understand is corrupt. And they need somebody that's firm, that'll get the country in a grip and turn it around and tell them what to do. So that's my guess. I think we're going to have something approaching a military dictatorship in 2016. But we'll see. I hope I'm dead wrong. But actually, it doesn't matter which one of these morons is elected, because it's very much, the United States is very much in the same position that Rome was in after Augustus. And then they got Tiberius. And he was so terrible in his later years that everybody was incredibly happy when he died. And they thought, well, it really can't get any worse. But they were wrong. And then they got Claudius, who was a very stupid emperor. He went from evil to stupid. And then, after Claudius, glad he was gone, it's got to get better. No, they went back to evil. They got Caligula. And then after Caligula, how could it get any worse? Then they got Nero. Well, how could it get any worse? Well, then they got a civil war. So it's not at all an unlikely scenario, I think, for the US. Just a brief word about the nation state and democracy. How much time have I taken?
You have another 15 minutes.
Oh, okay. I don't have that much more to say about this. I've got to say a few words about democracy, though, because everybody says, well, yeah, but democracy is the answer to this type of thing. But I think that although the nation state itself, an institution which arose in the mid-17th century, generally speaking, people started out with tribes, where you were loyal to other people that you generally shared a common ancestor with, and you were all kind of related, and you all knew each other. And then it moved into empires, Egypt and the Babylonians and the Assyrians and the Romans and so forth. And then it went to the nation state, where you're not really, your loyalty is not to Obama or Bush or Reagan, it's to the entity, the country itself. I suppose it's an improvement over the idea of a kingdom, but it's got to be an improvement over the idea of a kingdom. How degraded is that to forced to be loyal to some degenerate that's dressed up in purple robes? It's unbelievable. I'm so embarrassed for those poor stupid Brits who, toast the Queen and all this type of thing. It's just embarrassed when I'm with these people. So the latest incarnation of the nation state focuses on democracy, and it's really become a secular religion these days. People think you say, it's like saying, well, everybody believes in God. Well, no. Everybody believes in democracy. No, I don't think so. The belief that you can get the lowest common denominator of society to get together and vote in a mob and improve things, it's a giant circle jerk. It's something where everybody thinks they can live at the expense of everybody else. It's a mob rule dressed up in a coat and tie. So no, I decry democracy, and I do that publicly. I had an opportunity yesterday. I was on Russia Today, which along with Al Jazeera is the best news show on TV. I got to do a half an hour of this stuff to the hopeful amusement of RT's viewing public. Patriotism. You're supposed to be patriotic too. No, I don't believe in patriotism. Patriotism is the belief that your country is the best country in the world just because you happen to be born there. It's a crazy conceit. It makes no sense at all. So what's going to replace this? I think the nation state's a dead man walking. I think it's a dinosaur on its last legs at this point, but very dangerous. A big dinosaur, even if it was about to die, is still really dangerous. You want to stay out of its way. I'm a believer in files, some concept that was created by Neil Stephenson, the science fiction writer, and it basically posits that with the invention of telecommunications worldwide, cheap, easy, jet travel, cheap, easy everywhere, and especially the internet, we can find out who our real countrymen are. We're not medieval serfs anymore, where you live in a little village and you're born there and you don't go more than a day's walk away because there might be dragons over that mountain or something. You heard these stories. So the internet lets you connect with your real countrymen. My real countrymen aren't people that I share government ID from issued by the US government. Actually, most of my fellow Americans are actually my enemies. They're not my friends. I'd say the average Iranian is much likely to be more of a friend of mine than the average American. Why? Because the average American is a leech trying to take me down. The average Iranian has done me no harm at all. So it's actually exactly the opposite of what most people think, as far as I'm concerned. But the internet, as you all know, can allow you to find your real countrymen based on whatever is important to you. Maybe it's a hobby, maybe it's your religion, maybe most people here it's a philosophy, it's a way of living. There are 1,000 reasons why you could want to form friends. Although I think your philosophy and that type of thing is the most important one. But as far as I've said this for years, I'm closer to friends of mine in the Congo than I am to people that live 3 miles down the road from me in Aspen. people in the Congo, I don't share a race, I don't share religion, I don't share culture, I don't even share a real common language, but we agree on things that are important. But the people that live down the road, we have no agreement, and those people are an active danger to me. So your real countrymen can be anywhere, and I think the way people are going to organize themselves in the future is with files. They're going to find each other and eventually come to agreements for mutual protection, mutual benefit, and so forth. It'll be formalized, so forth. So I'd read Stevenson's book, Diamond Age, which gives a good explanation of the way this type of thing might work. And that's the way I think it's going to go. I don't know how we solve the problem of stupidity and evil. I don't know how we solve the problem of sociopaths. It's an individual thing. You have to solve it, if it's possible to solve, with every person individually, and you're dealing with his individual psyche to try to cure the mental aberrations, which are very mild, or I'd like to think are very mild, with that 80% of people. And then the 20% have more of them, and I don't know how you solve the problem with the really serious ones. That's always going to be there. All you can do, and this is the only reason why politics is important, is you can try to minimize the organizations which make it easy for them to gravitate to each other and get power. And that's all you can do. Other than that, I'd say the best thing to do is to get off this planet, but I don't know where the hell to go at this point. So that's a problem. So I guess I'm here for the duration. You probably are too. So those are just some miscellaneous thoughts on good and evil. And Giant asked me to talk about good and evil, or something like that. So.
We may have time. We have time for a couple of questions if there are any.
There shouldn't be any questions about that, I wouldn't think.
Hi, Doug. Thank you for your eloquent, brutal honesty. I really appreciate it. It was very refreshing. So you're among friends here, and you're able to speak the way you have. But let's say when you cross the border and you're accosted by sociopaths in costumes, do you play it maybe more low key? Do you keep your opinions to yourself? So I'm of the same mindset as you. Am I to live my life, under the radar, or or should I beat my chest and be proud of it?
That's a very direct and important question. How do you react to these people? My problem is I just can't fucking help myself. And it's like, I'll tell you, the last time I entered the United States, I was coming from Zurich by way of Madrid. And so it was a long flight. I got in at 6 o'clock in the morning or something like that. And this is the way it happens. I always keep my brow on. I never smile with them. I'm businesslike. I'm not looking for trouble. But, I don't like being annoyed. So I'm going through the line, and I'm reading my magazine, which I've been reading, standing in this line. And, out of the corner of my eye, I'm looking at, these other chimpanzees and how they're reacting to this, because it's kind of interesting. I go back to reading my magazine. It's my turn. Go up, throw my passport in front of her. She can read it. It's a young girl, early 30s probably. And go back to reading my magazine. And she says, would you look at me, please? So I looked at her like she's a bug. And... and then she starts asking me some questions. I don't know. They seem to be the same questions she was asking everybody, because it was taking like 2 or 3 minutes with everybody, interrogating them. So one of the questions she asked, do you have over $10,000? And I said, no. And go back to my magazine while she's playing with the passport and playing with her computer and all this type of thing. And more questions and so forth. And then she asked me again. And she says, do you have over $10,000? And I looked at her and I said, what did I just tell you? You know, and of course you know what happens now. She takes out a red pen and marks an S on it, and I say, oh, Jesus. You know, this, I know the drill. So I get my bag, and you know, it's hot and in the customs area there, and I flew into Miami from Zurich, I guess, no, from Madrid. And so here I am, going for secondary with the bag, and I'm sweating. This is like a signal that these guys are supposed to pick up on. And so I go to the secondary guy, and one of the guys that's in secondary before me, he's not an American, I don't think. I see the customs guy say, show me what's in your pockets. He has the guy turn his pockets inside out. I said, Jesus, this is gonna be something. And so, throw my bag up there, and I wait for the, you know, answer the question. So he asked me, where you coming from? What do you do? One-word answers. He says, what do you do? And I said, why were you in Zurich? To give a speech. So what do you do? I'm a writer and a speaker. And I'll tell you, it was the most amazing. Maybe these guys are all told things. And he didn't open my bag. He didn't ask me any more questions. So it's the most amazing. So maybe, you know, if you tell them you're in a position to, you know, make their life, to draw attention to them. So that's what I do. I just do what I do. I don't try to be an actor. I'm not a very good actor. I just act like myself, and I really don't give a damn. If they take me into a back room, maybe I'll miss my flight, but I'll have a new experience, just like Rick said. You know, the good news is I'll have something to talk to you about the next time. So that's my answer. I'm not looking for trouble. I just act like myself. And I'm sorry that doesn't suit them most of the time.
Okay, Doug, I've got the next question. I know you're personal friends with Ron Paul. Do you believe he's innately corrupt?
No. Just like I don't believe that most of the founding fathers were innately corrupt. I think they had a situation, what people in government call a situation, and most of them were goodwill farmers and merchants, tried to do the right thing, and there's small remnants of them hanging around. So I'd say one out of, how many people in Congress are there, 500 and something? I'd say 1 out of 500 people of goodwill is probably statistically average. It's a bell-shaped curve going both ways. Yeah. So no, I think I think he's an okay guy. Last question.
Last question.
This one I can't help but asking. How do you feel about what the metals markets are doing, and why are they so boring? Do you think the mania 2 years ago, all the silver bugs going crazy on the internet, you think that was a little localized phenomenon? And what do you see going forward?
Well, look, I'm a big metals bull. I really am. It's the only financial asset that's not simultaneously somebody else's liability. All these paper currencies are eventually going to reach their intrinsic value. I don't know what's going to happen to the stock market in general. I think the economy is going to be rough. I think that as a speculation, I think these mining stocks are getting to be really interesting now. I'm not saying it's the bottom, but I think it's approaching the bottom. So that's what I'd say. And I continue to buy gold and silver. I continue to buy gold and silver. But you know, that's all I can say. But all over the world, what's happening is it's becoming, they're clamping down. Like I found out just yesterday, you all may not know this, but it's impossible. It's illegal. Can't be done. For a non-Canadian or a non-Canadian resident, proven by a visa in their passport to open a Canadian bank account now. If you're not a Canadian, now, and I don't mean you can be a non-American. Go in, they won't open the account for you here in Canada. So it's changing everywhere. They're clamping down. So, I hate to leave on such a high note.
Thank you, Dr. Casey, and also, of course, thank you, Rick Rule, two mentors of mine.